A man walks into frame. He doesn't smile. He doesn't soften the edges. He looks at you the way someone looks at something they've already buried. Lee Marvin spent 63 years on this earth and never once apologized for the weight he carried. Not to Hollywood, not to the men who wanted him softer, not to the women who wanted him closer. He showed up with the same face every time. The face of a man who had seen something the rest of the room hadn't and couldn't forget it even if he wanted to. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a man who's been to war. Not the silence of peace, the silence of waiting, of knowing noise means danger, that comfort is temporary, that every moment of calm is just the space between one violence and the next. Marvin learned that silence in the Pacific. 19 years old, a Marine, Saipan, a sniper's bullet through the spine, 4 months in a naval hospital, Purple Heart, medical discharge. He came home with a limp that never fully healed and a look at his eyes that never went away. The war didn't make him a hero. It made him a man who understood that survival wasn't noble, it was mechanical. You either kept moving or you didn't, and the ones who didn't weren't weaker, they were just unlucky. He didn't talk about it much, not in the way men are supposed to talk about service. No stories of brotherhood or honor, just fragments, flashes, the sound of artillery, the way a body falls, the weight of a rifle, the taste of fear before you push it down and do what you're told anyway. His father was a disciplinarian, cold, distant, the kind of man who believed that hardness was a virtue and that affection was indulgence. Marvin grew up in New York, then moved around, restless, searching for something that didn't have a name yet. He was expelled from schools, got into fights, drifted, joined the Marines because drifting doesn't work in wartime. You either commit or you disappear. The war gave him structure. It also gave him nightmares. When he came back, he didn't know what to do with himself. He tried plumbing. He tried other things. Nothing stuck. Then someone told him about acting, community theater. He didn't think of it as art. He thought of it as another job, another way to keep moving, another way to not think too much about what he'd left behind in the sand and the smoke. But something happened when he got on stage. He didn't have to pretend to be hard. He didn't have to pretend to be dangerous. He didn't have to pretend that something inside him had been broken and never set right. He just had to stand there and let people see what was already true. Hollywood noticed. Not because he was charming, not because he had the face of a leading man, but because he had the face of a man who had done things and lived with them. The kind of face that made audiences uncomfortable in the right way. The kind of face that reminded people that violence isn't clean and heroism isn't simple, and men who kill don't always come home whole. He played villains, thugs, killers, men who didn't apologize, men who didn't explain themselves, men who understood that the world wasn't fair and didn't waste time wishing it was different. But even in those early roles, there was something else, something under the surface, a sadness, a distance, a sense that the man on screen wasn't acting as much as he was remembering. His breakout came in The Big Heat. He plays a hired gun who throws boiling coffee in a woman's face. It's one of the most vicious moments in 1950 cinema, but Marvin doesn't play it with rage. He plays it with indifference, like a man who's done worse and knows he'll do worse again. Like a man who stopped asking whether he was good or bad a long time ago and just accepted that he was useful. For years, he was the heavy, the killer, the soldier, the man with no mercy. He made a career out of being the thing other actors didn't want to be, the thing audiences were afraid of. But something was shifting. The parts got bigger, the characters got more complex. He wasn't just the villain anymore. He was the man who carried the story, the man who held the weight. In The Killers, he plays a hitman who questions whether killing for money is all there is. In Cat Ballou, he plays 2 roles, one a drunk, one a killer, and won an Academy Award for it. Not because he was funny, because he was tragic. Because even in a comedy, he played a man who was destroying himself and couldn't stop. Then came The Dirty Dozen, then Point Blank, then Hell in the Pacific, then Monty Walsh. With each film, the violence got quieter, the pain got louder. In Point Blank, he plays a man who is already dead inside, moving through the world like a ghost, taking revenge not because it will heal him, but because it's the only thing left to do. In Hell in the Pacific, he's stranded on an island with an enemy soldier, and the film becomes a meditation on futility, on the stupidity of war, on the absurdity of two men trying to kill each other when they're both just trying to survive. In Monty Walsh, he's an aging cowboy watching the world change around him, knowing that men like him don't belong anymore, that the frontier is closing, and there's no place left for men who know how to ride and fight and endure. These weren't action films.
They were elegies. Elegies for men who had outlived their usefulness, for men who had been shaped by violence and couldn't exist without it, for men who were too hard to adapt and too proud to disappear. Marvin wasn't playing characters. He was playing versions of himself. He was playing the question he'd been carrying since the war. What do you do when the thing that made you who you are is also the thing that ruins you? Hollywood didn't know what to do with men like Marvin. Not then, not now. There was a time when the industry wanted men who looked like they could take a punch. Men who had been broken and rebuilt. Men who understood that life wasn't a story with a happy ending, but a series of small survivals strung together until you ran out of luck. But culture shifted. Movies got softer. Heroes got more vulnerable. Masculinity became something to apologize for. Strength became something to interrogate. The old archetypes, the stoic, the warrior, the man who endures without speaking, started to feel like relics, like symbols of a time that was better off forgotten. Marvin didn't change with it. He couldn't. Not because he was stubborn, not because he was clinging to some outdated idea of manhood, but because the war had carved something into him that couldn't be carved out. A kind of emotional armor, a distance, a refusal to let anyone see the part of him that was still 19 years old and bleeding in the sand. He drank. He fought with directors. He fought with co-stars. He fought with himself. He had relationships that fell apart because he couldn't let anyone in. He won awards and walked away from them like they meant nothing. He made great films and terrible films and didn't seem to care which was which. He kept working not because he loved acting, but because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. There's a scene in Monty Walsh where Marvin's character is offered a job performing in a Wild West show, a spectacle, a parody of the life he lived. He tries it once. He stands in front of a crowd, dressed in costume, pretending to be the thing he actually was, and he walks away. Because there's a difference between living something and performing it. Marvin knew that. He knew that the men Hollywood celebrated weren't the men who had actually done the hard things. They were the men who looked good pretending. And he knew that the audience didn't want the real version. They wanted the sanitized version. The version that didn't smell like blood and sweat and fear. The version that let them feel tough without ever having to be scared. He gave them the real version anyway. Not because he was brave, but because he didn't know how to do it any other way. By the end of his career, the roles got smaller. The industry moved on. He was too old, too rough, too much of a reminder of something people didn't want to think about anymore. He didn't complain, he just kept showing up. He died in 1987, heart attack, 63 years old. Buried at Arlington National Cemetery, not because he was a star, but because he was a Marine. There's something tragic about that. A man who spent his entire career playing soldiers and killers and hard men, and in the end, the only identity that mattered was the one he earned before he ever stepped in front of a camera. You watch his films now and you see something Hollywood doesn't make anymore. Not toughness for its own sake, not violence as entertainment, but the cost of it, the weight, the silence afterward. You see a man who knew that survival isn't the same as victory, that coming home isn't the same as being whole, that carrying the weight doesn't make you a hero, it just makes you tired. And you wonder if that's what scared people. Not the violence, the truth underneath it.
The truth that some men don't heal, that some men carry the war with them forever, that some men are built to endure, not to thrive, and that we live in a world that doesn't know what to do with them, a world that wants heroes who smile and recover and move on, a world that wants strength without scars. Marvin never gave them that. He gave them scars. He gave them distance. He gave them the uncomfortable truth that some things break you and you keep going anyway, not because you're strong, but because stopping isn't an option. And maybe that's why his films still matter. Not because they're entertaining, but because they ask a question no one wants to answer. What do you do with men who were built for war? What do you do when the war ends and they're still here? What do you do when the thing that saved them is also the thing that destroyed them? Marvin never answered that question. He just lived it and left the rest of us to sit with it. There's a photograph of Marvin from the 1960s. He's on a film set, standing off to the side, cigarette in hand, not looking at the camera, not looking at anyone, just staring at something in the middle distance, the way men stare when they're not really seeing what's in front of them, when they're seeing something else, something further back. His co-stars talked about that look. They said he would disappear sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a scene. He'd be there physically, but somewhere else entirely. And when he came back, he wouldn't explain where he'd been. He'd just pick up where he left off like nothing had happened. That's what trauma does. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make noise. It just pulls you under when you're not expecting it. And the men who live with it learn to function around it, to keep moving even when part of them is still trapped in the moment that broke them. Marvin never called it trauma. That word didn't exist for men like him. Not in that way. You didn't talk about being damaged. You didn't talk about being scared. You just kept your head down and did the work, and hoped that staying busy would keep the ghosts quiet. But the ghosts never stay quiet forever. His first marriage ended in divorce, so did his second. He had children he couldn't connect with the way he wanted to, not because he didn't care, but because caring meant opening something up that he'd spent decades trying to keep closed. Because letting people in meant letting them see the part of him that was still bleeding, and he didn't know how to do that without everything falling apart. There's a story his son told years later about coming home one day and finding Marvin sitting alone in the dark, not drinking, not watching television, just sitting there, silent. When his son asked if he was okay, Marvin just nodded, said he was fine, said he was just thinking. But the look on his face wasn't the look of a man who was fine. It was the look of a man who was holding something too heavy to put down and too dangerous to carry. That's the thing about men like Marvin. They don't break in obvious ways. They don't fall apart in public. They don't ask for help. They just let you see the cracks until it's too late. They just carry the weight until the weight becomes who they are, until they can't remember what it felt like to be light. And Hollywood didn't know what to do with that, because Hollywood sells fantasy. It sells catharsis. It sells the idea that suffering is temporary and redemption is always possible, and men who go through hell come out the other side stronger and wiser and whole. But Marvin's characters didn't come out whole. They came out broken, and they stayed broken, and they kept moving anyway. In Prime Cut, he plays a mob enforcer sent to collect a debt in Kansas. The film is bizarre and violent and surreal. His character barely speaks. He just walks through the carnage with the same dead-eyed expression, like a man who has seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. There's no arc, no transformation, just a man doing a job because jobs keep you from thinking. In Emperor of the North, he plays a hobo riding the rails during the Great Depression, locked in a brutal contest of wills with a sadistic railroad conductor. The film is about survival, about pride, about men who have nothing left but the refusal to surrender. His character doesn't win because he's heroic. He wins because he's more willing to endure pain than the other man, because endurance
is the only currency he has left.
In The Iceman Cometh, adapted from Eugene O'Neill's play, he plays Hickey, a man trying to force his friends to face the lies they tell themselves. It's one of his most complex performances, quieter, more internal. And at the end, when the truth comes out, when you realize what he's been hiding, it's not a revelation, it's a confession. The confession of a man who has been running from himself for so long that he doesn't know who he is without the running. These weren't the roles that made him famous. These were the roles that showed who he really was. A man trying to make sense of a life that didn't make sense. A man trying to find meaning in a world that kept proving there wasn't any. A man trying to reconcile the boy he was before the war with the man he became after it, and failing. His drinking got worse as he got older, not in a public, tabloid way, but in the quiet, steady way that men drink when they're trying to dull something that won't go away. He'd show up to sets hungover. He'd forget lines. He'd get into arguments, but he'd still deliver, still find the truth in the scene, still give you the performance. Because the work was the only thing that made sense. The work was the only place where the pain had a purpose. Directors didn't always know how to handle him. Some were afraid of him. Some respected him. Some just let him do what he wanted because fighting him took more energy than it was worth. But the good ones, the ones who understood what they were working with, knew that Marvin wasn't difficult because he was arrogant. He was difficult because he cared too much, because he couldn't fake it, because every scene, every moment, every line had to mean something or it wasn't worth doing. There's a story from the set of The Big Red One, Sam Fuller's war film that took decades to make. Marvin plays a World War I veteran leading a squad through World War II. Fuller, who had also served in the war, cast Marvin because he knew Marvin understood something most actors didn't. He understood what it felt like to carry the dead with you, to see faces in your sleep that don't belong to anyone living. On set, Marvin would sometimes stop in the middle of a take, not because he forgot his lines, but because something would hit him, some memory, some flash, and he'd have to take a moment, breathe, find his way back. Fuller never cut the camera. He knew what he was watching. He knew that what made Marvin great wasn't his talent, it was his honesty. The honesty of a man who couldn't lie about what he'd seen. That kind of honesty doesn't make you popular. It makes you uncomfortable to be around. Because people don't want to be reminded that the world is brutal, that violence is real, that trauma doesn't heal just because time passes. They want to believe that suffering is noble, that pain makes you stronger, that war turns boys into men and men into heroes. But Marvin knew the truth. War doesn't turn boys into men. It turns boys into ghosts. And the ones who survive spend the rest of their lives trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. You can see it in his later films, the weariness, the exhausting, the sense that he's playing men who are too tired to fight anymore, but too stubborn to surrender. In Avalanche Express, in Death Hunt, and Gorky Park, he's not the young gunslinger anymore. He's the old warrior, the man who has outlived his time, the man who knows the ending before it comes. There's a moment in Gorky Park where his character, an American detective, sits across from a Soviet policeman, and they talk about the cost of doing their jobs, about what it takes to look at dead bodies and broken lives and keep going. And Marvin doesn't play it with bravado. He plays it with resignation, like a man who has been doing this so long he can't remember why he started. Like a man who knows that justice isn't real and morality is a luxury, and all you can do is try to stop the worst things from happening, knowing you'll always fail more than you succeed. That scene isn't in the book. It was added because Marvin insisted on it, because he needed the character to say what he'd been carrying his entire life, that doing the hard things doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you the person who did them, and you live with that forever. By the time he made his last films, he looked older than he was. The drinking had aged him, the war had aged him, the weight had aged him. But he kept working, not because he needed the money, not because he loved the spotlight, but because stopping meant sitting still, and sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. And remembering was the one thing he couldn't do. He died of a heart attack in Tucson, Arizona, August 29, 1987. He was at home. His wife found him. The news reported it like they report the death of any actor. Career highlights, awards, memorable roles, the usual obituary language. But the Marines remembered him differently. They buried him at Arlington, full military honors. Not because he was famous, because he was one of them. A man who had bled in the sand and carried the scars for the rest of his life. There's something about that burial that matters. It wasn't Hollywood that claimed him in the end. It was the war. The thing that made him, the thing that broke him, the thing he spent his entire life trying to outrun and never could. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that he died, but that he never escaped. That the war never let him go. That every role he played, every character he inhabited, every moment he stood in front of a camera was just another way of saying the same thing he'd been saying since he was 19 years old and lying in a hospital bed with a bullet in his spine. I survived, but I don't know why. I came home, but I never left. I kept moving, but I never healed. You watch his films now and you realize they're not entertainment, they're testimony. The testimony of a man who saw something the rest of us didn't and couldn't forget it. Who knew that the world is violent and unfair and that survival is luck, not virtue. Who understood that strength isn't about winning, it's about enduring, about carrying the weight even when it's crushing you, about showing up even when every part of you wants to disappear. And that's what Hollywood has lost. Not tough guys, not action heroes, but men who carry the truth. Men who don't soften the edges, who don't make it easier, who don't apologize for being hard, who stand in front of you with all their scars showing and dare you to look away. Marvin never looked away. Not from the war, not from the pain, not from the darkness. He looked at it straight on, and he let you see it. And that's why his work still matters. Not because it's comforting, but because it's true. Because it reminds us that some men don't get to heal, that some stories don't have happy endings, that some weights don't get lighter no matter how long you carry them. And it asks a question that we still don't want to answer. What do we owe the men we send to war? Not the statues, not the speeches, not the parades, but the truth. The truth that we break them and they don't unbreak. The truth that we use them and then discard them when they're no longer useful. The truth that they come home and we expect them to be normal, to be fine, to move on, to smile and integrate and pretend that what they saw and did didn't change them. But it did change them, and Marvin never pretended otherwise. He wore the change like a scar, and he made us look at it. And maybe that's the real reason he's forgotten now. Not because his films aren't good, but because we don't want to remember what they mean. We don't want to sit with the discomfort. We don't want to ask the hard questions. We don't want to admit that we create men like Marvin, hard, distant, scarred, and then we resent them for being exactly what we made them. So we move on. We make softer films. We tell easier stories. We celebrate heroes who win cleanly and love openly and recover fully. And we forget the men who don't. The men who carry the weight in silence. The men who endure without explanation. The men who survive but never heal. Lee Marvin was one of those men. And his films are the record of what that looks like. Not the myth, the reality. The long, quiet, painful reality of living with what you've seen and done and can't undo. And maybe we're not ready for that yet. Maybe we never will be. But the work is still there, waiting for the people who are willing to look, for the people who are willing to sit with the discomfort, for the people who understand that some truths don't comfort you. They just sit there, heavy, permanent, real.